Support for today's episode comes from Amazon. Amazon is working toward a carbon-free energy future, doing more with less, investing where it matters most, and supporting communities where we operate. Europe has power to spare, but not the wires to move it. Executives evaluating a new factory, data center, or electrification project in Europe are discovering that the continent's power shortage isn't really a power shortage at all. It's a delivery problem, and it's now deciding where projects can be built, at least as much as labor costs or tax policy ever did. Europe has enough electricity supply in aggregate to support its industrial and digital growth plans. What it lacks is the transmission and distribution capacity to move that power to where new demand actually wants to locate. Almost 700 gigawatts GWs of renewable and large load projects sit stuck in grid connection queues across the European countries that publish the data, according to Ember's April 2026 analysis. And the European Commission has put the region's grid investment need at roughly $1.37 trillion, 1.2 trillioners, by 2040. For a company deciding where in Europe to site a facility, that gap has stopped being a background policy debate and started showing up directly in project timelines. In a global environment where speed to power has already overtaken price as the leading site selection factor. Three of Europe's largest economies illustrate the problem from three different angles, and none of them point toward a quick fix. Ireland reopened its grid, then made the terms harder to meet. Ireland spent 4 years under a de facto moratorium on new data center grid connections around Dublin, imposed in 2021 after data centers grew to consume roughly a fifth of the country's electricity and threatened to push that share past 30% by the early 2030s. The Commission for Regulation of Utilities, CRU, ended the freeze in December 2025, but the replacement policy is not a return to open connections. New data centers seeking a grid link must now install dispatchable on-site or proximate generation and storage capacity matched to their full import capacity, feed power back into the grid when needed, and source 80% of their annual electricity demand from new Irish renewables within 6 years of coming online. Only one project received a connection offer during the entire moratorium period. The new rules widen the door, but they also convert what used to be a straightforward utility hookup into a parallel generation and compliance project that has to be engineered, financed, and permitted alongside the facility itself. Germany is rationing by zone, not by order of application. Germany's grid connection backlog has grown large enough that its 4 transmission system operators had received more than 200 gigawatts of battery storage connection requests alone by the end of 2025, on top of applications from data centers, electrolyzers, and industrial loads competing for the same substations. A draft grid package now moving through Germany's federal government would let grid operators designate capacity-limited zones in areas where curtailment already exceeds 3% of generation. And in those zones, new renewable and storage projects would only get a fast connection if they waive compensation for future curtailment for up to a decade. The draft also aims to replace first-come, first-served queuing with prioritization based on project readiness and how well a proposed site matches available grid capacity. Grid expansion itself still runs on an 8 to 12-year timeline under current German law, which means the connection reform, even if adopted as drafted, changes who gets to the front of the line without changing how long the line actually is. The Netherlands and Denmark show what happens when the queue stops moving entirely. The Dutch grid operator TenneT's waiting list held 212 requests, totaling roughly 38 gigawatts as of a February 2026 disclosure to Parliament, while regional Dutch grid operators separately reported more than 14,000 requests, totaling about 9 gigawatts. Denmark's transmission operator, EnergyNet, went further and simply paused new grid connections in March 2026 after a sudden surge in applications from data centers, batteries, and power-to-X plants pushed queued consumption past 60 gigawatts, more than 8 times the country's 2024 peak demand. Both cases point to the same underlying dynamic. Connection queues built for a slower, more predictable growth curve are now processing requests in a fraction of the volume arriving, and pausing or rationing has become the operator's default response rather than an exception. It is the same instinct Hydro-Quebec reached for when its own low-cost power promise collided with real demand, just arrived at through a queue freeze instead of a rate hike. What this means for site selection right now. None of this means Europe is short on ambition or capital. In most of these markets, a company can finance and build a factory, data center, or battery plant faster than the grid can connect it. That inverts the traditional site selection sequence, where power access got confirmed late and treated as a formality. Grid capacity now works as an early filter, right alongside labor and logistics, the same shift already visible in how the UAE sequenced power, capital, and permitting before Stargate broke ground, rather than negotiating each piece separately. The irony is that Dublin, Frankfurt, and Amsterdam carry some of the longest queues on the continent precisely because everyone reached that conclusion first and applied to the same substations. Regions with less legacy industrial density, but genuine headroom on the wires, are picking up projects that a decade of conventional site selection criteria would have sent straight to the capitals. Sustainability Soundbites energy coverage is sponsored by Amazon. Visit the link in our show notes to learn more about Amazon's spotlight on energy. For sponsorship opportunities with Environment and Energy Leader, please reach out to a member of our team.